I'd like to call the Finance and Personnel Committee for Tuesday, December 17th to order. Roll call, please.
Mark Williams.
Here.
Mike Melchewski.
Here.
Tom Selk.
Here.
John Duska.
Present.
And Zerbal is excused.
Please stand for the pledge.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Is there any changes to the agenda?
I don't have any.
Get a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved. Second.
Motion to second. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. Action on the minutes of the Finance and Personnel Committee regular meeting, June 18th. Do you have a motion to approve those?
Motion to approve. Second.
Got a motion and a second. Any discussion? All those in favor of the motion, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. 6, comments from the public. I don't see any public here this evening, so we'll move on to action items. 7A, discussion possible action on clerk treasurer position.
Okay, I will start this action item. I was recently at the conference for the League of Municipalities, and I was sitting next to a clerk that had been appointed from a very, very small village, only had 88 people in the village. And she had just been appointed because the person who was the clerk for many, many, many eons had passed away. So she had to clean out this individual's office. She found money. Every time they would have like a staff meeting, she would bring a bag of money that she found in this gentleman's office. She had thousands of dollars for dog licenses from even in the 1990s. There was a car of theirs that had gotten hit. There was a $15,000 insurance check that was never cashed. So there was a lot of issues with her trying to clean up these items. So, you know, we were recently told that our clerk, Patrick Moynihan, is going to be running for county clerk. So I know that we had a referendum years ago on the clerk treasurer position. And what I'd like to see is if we could put a referendum question of sorts out there again so that we don't end up in a situation like that. The majority of the clerk treasurer positions that are elected are in towns, not villages and cities. There were 169 people, or 169 communities that responded to a question of, is your clerk elected or appointed? Of 169, only 4 are elected. So I just talked with Allison and thought that we should bring this forward because Patrick will be running next year. His term would be up in April of 2022. So we would have to get things going if we wanted to do a referendum question. So I will turn it over to Allison.
Ditto to everything Mary said, except for the survey is clerk treasurer specific positions. We weren't able to gather the data for where they're separated. They're all some different organizations and whatnot, but still their sentiments were that if it's just a treasurer or just a clerk, it's at least probably like 60% that is still appointed versus elected. A big part in terms of the clerk position, which was maybe more traditionally elected, and why that's changing is just the complexity of elections themselves. And I think that's what we're more worried about, is there's so many rules and regulations and everything that somebody just can't step in and kind of on a whim run an election anymore. It just doesn't happen that way. And the problems that come out if you don't have a good person in that position doing that has enormous impact and is very public. So that would be our concern in just trying to recruit somebody into the position or have somebody run that comes in and takes the position seriously, as Pat has done. And we do still feel that the treasurer duties themselves it's a smaller portion of what Pat does currently. And they're, over time, just in terms of how we function, it's easier for those things to be done within the finance department rather than trying to pull those out and separate those. So overall, that's our recommendation. I can walk through any questions you have or the kind of the timing of things, if you would like me to. Not sure how much you read or if you just have questions.
Educate me as to these changes. Does this have to be in referendum, or can the board change them? I'm just a little confused as to how the changes can be made.
They're in a charter ordinance, and so I'm just speaking historically speaking. The last time that it came up was when Tim Woodworth was in the position. He said, yeah, you need to get rid of this, and there was a sentiment by the board at that time saying, look, this is elected by the people should have a say in whether that gets changed. And so that is why we did an advisory referendum. The board is not bound by that decision in any way, but I think they were looking to that guidance. I think part of the issue of what happened when that did go through is there was nothing done by the village to educate people. If you think about what happened with the school referendum previously, or even the survey that's going out for the prospective referendum from the school district, there's information pieces sent out saying, why are we doing this? What does it cost? What does it change? What is the savings? Whatever it is. That information was not done. There was really nothing done. Frankly, there was a lot of politics surrounding some of what was happening at that time in terms of those questions. And so I think everybody just frankly did not want to touch it with a 10-foot pole. And so then it sat, and just given people were not educated on the values of it one way or another, I think they thought that, particularly with Dawn in her role, I don't think she wanted it to be changed. And so there was some concern that maybe that would unseat the existing clerk from her position and whatnot. So at this point, the board could adopt it. It's just more of a political sentiment as to whether they want to just decide and do that. There is, as it's noted in there, a 60-day window, so that because it's a typical ordinance, we'd approve, say on Tuesday, it would be published in the paper on Friday, and it goes effect upon publication. This has that 60-day window. And then it also has the impact of, because there's an existing elected position in there, it cannot take effect until the next term of the election. So what would happen is, let's say what we're anticipating, we think Pat will get elected to his county clerk position that he's vying for. And so we would have a vacancy in the clerk treasurer position, to which the board could appoint someone to fill that for the interim, and which our recommendation is just, well, the treasurer side would be absorbed on the finance side, and then the tricky part comes in, what's going to happen when that term is up? So if we say, okay, let's appoint someone to that position, you need someone qualified or someone that you're going to train to become qualified. But the resistance comes in from somebody coming in and saying, well, if it's going to be elected in a year, then I need to move into the village, or I'm going to expend the time and energy to do this, or quit my job. It's definitely a full-time position. Why would they do that and then risk not being elected? So that kind of hinders your appointment process. So you're really, we kind of lucked out with Pat and his willingness to kind of jump on board and being available at that time to fill that position and fill that role, and be a village resident, and have no one run against it.
The last when we had this as a referendum the last time, I was one of the main guys that put that forward at that time because of the charter ordinance, and I know what it takes to do the clerk job, and we've been fortunate in Ashwaubenon to have good clerks in the past, as far as I can remember. But I know what has been changing and everything, and, I understand the change of going to an appointed clerk so that you can hire somebody that has had some training possibly, or in that position. So I don't disagree with that. What I have a problem with it is just doing it unilaterally by the board. I think that the village residents have spoken before, and I think I echo the same sentiments that Mary would had when she said it, that if we've had it at one referendum here within the last, it's probably 6 years ago now, I'm guessing, that I wouldn't be in favor of just changing it without having to go back to the voters, I guess. But I understand, I agree that things have changed. So, I mean, but I think it should go back to the voters.
Well, and I think you're right. I think it needs to change. And I think when we talked about this 7 years ago, I supported that change. But when you have an advisory referendum that says 70% don't change,
That's hard to,
that's hard to ignore. The one risk I see, and I'm fine with doing an advisory referendum, is what happens if you end up 51 no, 49 yes? What happens if you get the same result? A majority says no. Do you go ahead and proceed at that point? I mean, 70 is very clear, 51-49 is, but yet the majority have spoken. So I guess if you proceed with an advisory referendum, and again, I would support that, you really have to have a very good plan in terms of putting the information out there.
I agree.
Because if you end up at 51-49, while legally you could still proceed, I think you have an ethical problem.
I agree, John. And that's why I told Allison, I said, I would not just across the board say, okay, board, we're going to vote on this. I could never do that. The people have the right to vote the position in. I would never take that voting right away from anybody. But I don't think that people back when we did that advisory referendum, I don't think that they were informed of, like, a lot of people thought that we needed the treasurer position because they collected the taxes. Well, we don't collect taxes here anymore. So there's a lot, they don't do, the treasurer doesn't do the day-to-day cash register type stuff is what I'm going to say. We've had discussions with Patrick on this also. The election thing is really huge. I mean, everybody sees it in all the national papers, you know, all the bad issues going on with elections and how to keep elections clean. We have to have an individual in that position that understands all that stuff. So.
Oh, yeah. No,
Yep.
I agree with you 100%. And just the election issue alone is difficult. And, well, we just had that ruling in Wisconsin where is it, 260,000 people are going to be taken off the voter rolls because of moving around or whatever the case is. So it's only going to get more complex.
Correct.
But what it does mean is that there's going to have to be, I think, a very strong effort made to inform people as to why this change is desirable. Because you don't want to end up with a similar result that you had last time.
Right. And like Mark said, I mean, we have been very, very fortunate in Ashwaubenon to have very good clerks that have worked here and really taken the job very serious and done a good job. You know, so I think the biggest key is to educate the people. And so, anyway.
Irregardless, don't you want to split off the treasurer and the clerk position anyway? Because when I was doing the budget, the question popped into my mind, some of the clerk's duties are being completed by the finance department, most of them.
Treasurers.
Treasurers. They're done by the finance department, so why wouldn't you split off and make the finance director treasurer and make the clerk the clerk?
Well, that's why I believe the question would be worded to have the finance department absorb the treasurer duties.
The issue really comes down to if you split the positions, you'd end up with 2 elected positions. So the board previously combined them to make them 1 elected position. Greg is our deputy treasurer, so we still have the ability to execute those technical responsibilities, and Pat still does some other treasurer duties as part of that. But you could end up, if you split them and ask 2 separate questions, you could get 2 separate results. And you could end up with 1 elected and 1 not, or you're ending up with 2 jobs, and we don't want them in 2 people. We want 1 to be absorbed, and we want 1 appointed, which it still would be absorbed
So,
and appointed.
so basically
but-
what you need from us is what our recommendation is, and I agree with you, Tom. I mean, it's like, so our recommendation basically to village board would be to go to referendum on a clerk position and have finance director take over treasurer's duties.
Yeah,
Is that what I'm hearing?
And that would be an advisory referendum.
Right.
Yeah.
When would this go on the ballot?
So, yeah,
Spring,
Okay.
when?
spring, so we're,
April.
we have to hop, yes.
Okay, so, someone want to make that motion? Or I'll make the motion to recommend to the village board that we go to advisory referendum for the clerk position and have the finance director take over treasurer.
does that have to be part of the referendum, that we split the offices?
No. I mean, the way I said it right there is
Yeah.
not, it's,
I'm just getting clarification.
Yeah.
I would split them without going to referendum, that's my opinion, but
if, yeah, that's fine. I mean, we can
You
still
would-
split it.
Well, so really you got 2 things going on.
right,
You want to split them regardless
correct.
of how they get occupied. And the second one would be, sure, okay.
Can I caution you against that? If you split, first of all, you can't split them now during the term. So you would have to split them for the next term, if you will. But if you go to referendum and you have split them and you get different results, you could end up with 2 elected positions. Or what if the treasurer one doesn't happen? You're going to end up with 2 positions when we only really want 1.
So what did I?
You know, if we're going to lose
did it say?
something, you know what I mean? Like, you still could end up having an elected treasurer. And what if you have an appointed clerk?
What was the motion?
Referendum, as advisory referendum for the clerk only, but the finance department would, or finance director would take over the treasurer.
No, I didn't, that doesn't say anything about splitting referendum questions.
I just want to make sure you're making the recommendation ultimately that we go to advisory referendum with the goal of having an appointed clerk and the treasurer duties absorbed, as opposed to if you recommend that they split it, it's really not
There's 2
split.
different things we're talking about here.
Correct, that's what I'm trying to caution, is like, we're trying to go get that advisory referendum on the current position that we have as a clerk treasurer. So we're going to ask 1 question, because that's
Sure.
what exists right now.
Well, don't you, what you really need is the authority to appoint both positions, period. And once you can do appointment versus election, how you shift it and split it doesn't matter.
Yeah, that kind of comes second, I guess,
Yeah.
is what I'm saying. The splitting will happen after that referendum. Does that make sense? If you split them ahead of time, you'll end up with necessarily 2 questions.
And I guess it's not authority, it's consent. I
So,
guess is the-
okay, now, if the constituents come back and say, no, leave it the way it is, make it an elected position, can the board go back after the election and say, we want to split these?
The board could split them, and they also could appoint them. It's just that politically, the board may not wish to go against the advisory referendum. And so assuming that that's the case, that they will not go against the recommendation of the advisory referendum, and they say that they want it elected, if we were to split them, we would go back to the way we were 8 years ago, and we would have an elected treasurer as one person and an elected clerk as a different person.
And you don't want to end up there.
No.
Because technically, the clerk is a full-time position no matter what, and the treasurer, if it's separate, you're talking about something extra now, unless it's all into one job. That's why it became, like, we don't need them we don't need two people.
So
We'll merge them together, and finances, that's why finance is helping out in a lot of those.
our recommendation then is, I believe, then to go to advisory referendum for the clerk treasurer position to be appointed.
Correct.
And I would just leave it at that.
Leave it at that.
There is a draft question in here, so if you wanted to take a stab at that, you certainly could in wordsmithing it further. Otherwise, just forward it on with your
That's-
recommendation, as stated, is totally great.
And it cannot be split now.
No, we don't want it
Correct.
split.
No, that's not what I asked. I said, you can't split it now, the job.
Correct. You can't split it in parts because it's already an
election, until the election.
elected person, and Pat is in that spot until 2022, April of 2022, unless he gives it up.
Well, one nice thing about your proposed language is there's that word absorbed, and taxpayers like that word. I mean, seriously.
I chose it on purpose.
I mean, anytime I see the word absorbed, I like that.
Okay, so we got the recommendation to the village board.
Read the motion back.
That you're
Well,
going to,
Mark, why don't you just use the language that she has on page 2, just a little bit above monetary impact?
that whole paragraph, you want it to be?
Yeah,
Yeah, that, Yeah,
recommend
that's well
that,
written, yeah.
recommend that this be advanced to the village board for approval.
That's fine.
Then you don't have
was
two
trying to find
questions. You only got one.
So the other two motions die for lack of a second.
Right.
Right. And Mark, if it's wrong, it's their fault.
Yeah. Okay, I'll make that motion that we put that paragraph as the motion.
Should the Village of Ashwaubenon,
Yep.
that one?
Yep.
Yep.
And I'll second.
Any other discussion?
Nope.
All in favor of the motion, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. I'm gonna find my agenda. B, investment report.
Just wanted to provide you kind of our standard investment summary. Our investment portfolio has not changed, and I will, in April is usually around that time frame, as I'll have a more detailed explanation of what we have. So the funds are doing really well. So we've seen more interest income this year than we have in many years past. So nothing really new, it just keeps going, and our total rate of return is just under 8% for both of the portfolios.
Any questions?
Need a motion?
I think it's just informational for us, right?
Information only.
Go on to 7C, which is the general fund financials for November.
This is information only as well. These are the general fund financials through November. We're doing well to budget this year so far. I'm projecting somewhere around 275,000 excess. There's a variety of factors. We've got a lot more room tax at the end of the year that I'll talk about in the next action item. Building permit revenue is up, And state shared revenues were higher than anticipated, interest income's higher. Expenditures are pretty close to budget. It's all on the revenue side this year, where we're seeing more than expected in a lot of different areas. So overall, we've been able to absorb the higher snow removal costs that we had early in the year, so everything is doing well.
Okay. Any questions? Good to go. We'll go on to D, action on 2019 excess funds.
So with that, as I mentioned, some of those excess revenues in tune about $275,000. At the end of the year, what we'd like to do, and it's what's recommended by GFOA practices, is anytime you have excess funds, especially in your general fund, that you assign those or commit those to some purpose. The reason is you could say, oh, we had $100,000, and next year you spend it, and if you didn't assign it or commit it, the rating agencies and other people it'll look as though we overspent on next year's budget. They'll view that negatively, even though you can tell them it was from the prior year. They say, well, you didn't plan for this, and you must not have seen these costs coming. So what we do is we try to identify what they are, and the way the language is written, it'll be, assign it to something or whatever that final audited number is, which I won't know till, roughly April. And then we would put that into what intended purpose is. By assigning funds somewhere doesn't mean you can't change it. So if we put it into a certain fund and something else comes up, we can always, through board action, come back and reallocate the funds to a different purpose. So what I'm recommending is one item specifically, and it's been in the capital planning. The finance department's or our general ledger operating system, kind of the financial operating system, is due for an upgrade or replacement. I would like to replace it. It's an outdated tool. In fact, I've talked to, in the past 4 months, 3 different people from 3 different companies that literally laughed when I told them we were using Navision. And they said, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't know people still use that. It was never designed for government. It was the tool in place when I started, and it served its purpose. But I think, as we've mentioned, other things, there's a lot of changes and a lot of opportunity to find something better. What I'm asking is, of the excess funds, we reserve $100,000. Seems like a lot of money, and it is. The upgrade alone to what we have today would be $75,000. So for an additional $25,000, we could take on, we're looking at potentially taking on the building inspection software and some other features and tools that we don't currently use that would help create more efficiencies behind the scenes. One good thing out of that is I looked at just our maintenance costs, the annual maintenance fees that you pay for having software, and some other costs involved with our building inspection software. By being able to merge those, we'd see roughly about $20,000 a year savings. And I've actually had one other vendor come in, so that's just based off of that vendor. We would save about $20,000 a year alone. So over a 5-year period, essentially this would pay for itself. Mm-hmm. My intentions are to bring in a couple other options, have some demos, and get some quotes. Bring in all the key department personnel that need to see their portions, because it's really about a 9 to 12 month process to make this change. It's a big deal. There's a lot of work behind the scenes, capturing data and implementing into a new system. So I think by allocating $100,000 over to the finance department, that would allow me to get that. Probably wouldn't roll out till either November-ish or even into 2021. That's just the timing, depending on audits and things like that. The rest of the money we would recommend, any excess would go to our, we've had this in the past, the employee retirement fund. So we have, that's to cover the payouts for when employees retire for their earned accrued time off. And so that fund is constantly being drawn from, so we try to replenish it. And we have over the past few years, each year, taken excess funds and put it in there. So those are the recommendations that we would, I'm looking for the Finance Personnel Committee to recommend to Village Board. Certainly the board has the ability to use those funds for other purposes, but those are the recommendations.
And we can change that at any time.
Correct.
Okay. Any problems?
I'll make the recommendation as a motion.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Any questions? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion passes. Thank you very much. Items for next agenda. Have anything, please see the staff, call us, we'll get them on there. Need a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Thank you for coming.